The 15-Point Plan is part of the Win, Make, Give podcast network.
Welcome to the 15-Point Plan podcast. My name is Ryan Greigg, and as always, I am here with my partner, Jacqueline Smith. This podcast, Jacqueline, is geared towards increasing our energy and reducing our stress level through following the system that our business partner, Ben Kinney, has created called the 15-Point Plan. You can find this plan at winmakegive.com. And I've been talking with a lot of people about this lately, Jacqueline, because you can go to winmakegive.com. You can find that 15-point plan. You can download that sheet. And on the back side there, you can actually track that. And everybody that I've talked to over the last maybe 6 months or so that has done that, they're tracking it. They're doing it for 30 days. And everybody has said, Ryan, this has massively impacted my life for the better. So I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, winmakegive.com. Go download the 15-point plan with the tracker as well. And it will make everything that we're talking about on these Tuesday episodes even more relevant to you. And today, Jacqueline, today is a heavy topic. It's kind of a heavy topic, right? Because, well, why? What are we talking about?
Well, we're going to talk about influence. And specifically, we are going to talk about the importance of having people in your life who are willing to give you feedback and bring correction and challenge your perspectives. And we've both had the opportunity to have this, we'll just call it what it is. We have Ben Kinney in our life. And Ben Kinney, in case you don't know, he's the one that actually came up with the 15-point plan. And he's just such a great partner because he's always willing to share with us not necessarily what we want to hear, but what we actually need to hear, even if we might not like it in the moment. Right, Ryan?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I guess I said it's a little heavy, because whether it's Ben, our business partner, or maybe a family member, or maybe a friend, it's not an easy conversation sometimes, right? For a friend to essentially call out another friend and say, hey, dude, look, I'm your friend and I love you. But are you sure what you're doing right now is what's best for you or for that situation? And that's not an easy thing to do, having those tough conversations. So I think that's why I said, maybe on the heavier side, is these influences. How our people in our life influence us, both in negative and positive ways?
Yeah, and we all love the people that agree with everything that we think and do. And they're like those encouragers, those cheerleaders in your life that are just like, I've got your back no matter what. And I think sometimes, having someone's back is actually having the courage to bring things up that maybe aren't, in agreement, or just bringing a different perspective. And I think that's how we grow in life is, if you have those kinds of conversations and those types of people around you, I think it provides you with opportunities to grow. And it also is having your back because it's kind of bringing to light your blind spots.
Yeah.
And so when I think of like even the phrase, like, I've got your back, well, that means like, you've got my back. Well, let me know if there's anything back there that like, I'm not seeing, like my blind spots. And a lot of times like those are uncomfortable conversations, but they're needed. They're so important. And I think the more you become a leader too, I think the less and less of those people are just tend to be around you because, when you're a leader, you have influence and people see you kind of as not necessarily like an authority, but, an expert, or right. They see you in this way that maybe they don't want to challenge your thinking, or they just assume that what you're saying is correct. Or right. And I just think it's such an important conversation to make sure that we have those relationships around us. It's so important.
I agree, Jacqueline. And, it's kind of bringing up a question. I mean, maybe you can help me with this because I see two sides of this with a good leader. A good leader, number one, might point out the things that we need to know but don't want to hear. So a good leader might question the things that we're doing or not doing. But on the other side of that, and I'd be curious to know what you think, a good leader might also let us try those things that in their head they're thinking, I don't know about that, so that we can fail,
Mhm.
so that we can actually learn through that process. Maybe what the leader like thought the lesson was, but if they gave us that lesson, we wouldn't learn it. So how do we balance that out as a leader between telling people what they need to know from what we think and maybe letting them fail sometimes? Like as a leader, from when we're giving the influence, what are your thoughts on that, Jacqueline?
I mean, that's tough. I think one of the ways is instead of telling, I know like Ben models this really well. He actually just asks questions, So, I called him up. This was like a couple weeks ago now, and he brought something up, and he was like, "Do you think that you handled that like the best way that you could have, or do you think that there's something differently that you could have done?"
Mm.
So he didn't say, "Oh my gosh, that was really bad, Jacqueline. Like you shouldn't have done that, or you should have done this." Like he didn't do that. He said, "What do you think that you could have done differently?" And so it helped me reflect because sometimes, I'm moving really fast and I don't always think things through like on a 360-degree right view, and I'm looking at things from my perspective and just plugging away, and it was like, oh yeah, let me think about that. Um, and so he asks great questions. So I think as a leader, I think the best way to help people discover is to help them self-discover by asking great questions.
That completely makes sense. And as you say that, I'm writing down. He didn't tell you what was right or wrong. So a good leader doesn't tell people what's right or wrong. A good leader or good influencer just causes us to think different, or maybe
Hmm.
think deeper about what we said. And it also sounds like it caused you to slow down a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
well, hold on. Was that the best way to do that?
Hmm.
So I hear that. And as a leader, maybe it's not up to us to say that's right or that's wrong, but is that the best way?
Hmm.
Is that the best way for your goal, for your approach, for what you want from this? So causing thinking. My friend did that with me just a couple weeks ago. My best friend, who I joke and call my relationship coach, and for a rightful reason. I think the people that we look at in our lives should be doing things like we want to do. Well, they just celebrated their 11-year anniversary. They've been together for 17 years. They have a beautiful relationship, and I really look up to that. So I constantly ask him questions when I'm like thinking, what should I do here? And as you say that, I realize that's exactly what he did with me when I asked him some questions, and he just pointed out to me, "Are you sure? Is that the best way to do that, Ryan?
Hmm.
Is that the best way to do that and to keep building your relationship?" And what I wanted my best friend to tell me, I wanted my best friend to have my back, like you said. But my best friend having my back was telling me exactly that. So sometimes we think we want our friends to tell us things, but in hopes they'll actually tell us what we need to hear. And he just told me, and he pointed that out, and he caused me to slow down because he could hear I was getting frustrated.
Yeah.
But in doing that, he just asked me a couple questions like, is that the best way to do that? And the influence that he left me with was, is that the best thing for right now in this moment and for the future? Are you going to get the results that you want in the future based
Hmm.
off your response right now in this moment? And as I thought that through, I went, oh my gosh, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah.
And that was where the gold was with such a powerful person in my life, of having such a person that I love that can also be the influence that I need at those times to tell me, dude, take a step back and think differently. So that's what I guess what I'm hearing is influence equals to think different.
I think it is to teach people how to think different. And I think as the person on the receiving end, I do think that it's being growth minded is being able to receive feedback from people, constructive criticism, right? Or feedback. And I think like just like you did, you could have gotten defensive at your friend, and or I could have gotten defensive at Ben and said, "Well, yeah, it was the right way." And I don't know, I probably did that for 30 seconds before I you know, was able to then like, okay, really think about this, Jacqueline, like who do you want to be,
Hmm.
And so I think that it's an important skill to develop too, to be able to receive the feedback from people and not just get defensive or upset that someone isn't agreeing with you. And my husband and I do this a lot, right? Like sometimes I do want him just to agree with me and like stick up for me. But what I really do want deep down is I don't just want him to if I'm in the wrong. Like I want him
Mm,
to say like, hey, I actually think that you got a little emotionally reactive in that moment and
mm.
overreacted, or whatever. And that isn't fun to hear.
No,
That's
it's not. Yeah, it's not. That's a good point. And so do you and you mentioned that and maybe do you guys ever have like the conversation or is it like a, hey Jack, what's the saying? Like, do you want me to be an ear or a mouth right now? Like, do you want me to just sit here and listen to you? Or do you want me to sit here and listen and then offer advice or feedback?
Mhm.
Do you guys
Yeah.
do that?
Well, actually, years ago, we read this really impactful book together, and it really, I think, in a lot of ways, like it saved our marriage. It changed our marriage for
Huh.
sure. It was called "I Hear You," and I've recommended it to a lot of people. What happens is when I say I'm saying something or telling him, a story of something that happened or whatever, what people tend to need first before they can receive is they need just some acknowledgement,
Mm,
and that book taught us both just these little micro ways that we weren't giving that to each other.
mm,
And also it has some great examples, for even at work. If there's a situation at work, like how do you acknowledge and validate someone when you don't agree, actually, without agreeing or condoning. And it is a skill. And so
yeah.
we used to practice on our walks together, and we still do sometimes. Like we'll be walking and talking, and I'll be like, babe, I need you to do the book. Like, so we know it now. Like, I need you to do the book. And so what that means is I need you to listen first, and then it's so funny because once you listen and validate someone, then
Yeah.
it was almost like I would start asking him for his advice and his feedback.
Uh,
Whereas if he skipped that step and just went into advice and feedback, I would get frustrated. And so there is skill to giving feedback and there's skill to receiving feedback. And so I think sometimes we think influence is just, someone has influence or they don't have influence. Influence is a skill, and it's really just communication. And then being able to receive that too and communicate like what you need, and then be able to receive that feedback. I just think it's an important skill to develop. And that book, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I think it makes, it's made us better parents, better spouses, better leaders, better friends. Um, it's
The
really good.
fact, Jacqueline, I just need to like make sure our listeners just heard the fact that you said you practice this stuff.
Oh yeah.
That is incredible. The fact that, and that's like a high performer to the T right there. Like, you practice your relationship talks. Like, the listeners need to make sure they hear that. Like, that is incredible. That is amazing that you and your husband practice these types of conversations. Because what I hear is, look, when you really need the conversation, it's
Mhm.
probably not going to go great if you haven't like done it a couple times. When you
Ex-
really need it,
Yeah.
so if you're practicing it, then when you really need it, you're like, babe, hold up, like the book,
Yeah.
dang it.
Yeah.
That is so cool that you guys take those steps and then you carry those on by practicing and you do that. And it makes so much sense of like feeling heard before you can then tell you your opinion. Like,
Yeah.
and that's I think where so many of us go wrong. We listen to respond rather than listening to just listen.
hmm Yeah, it's interesting. We started this conversation, talking about influence, and we're ending up really talking about communication. And I do think
Yeah.
that that is how we influence people is we ask good questions, we listen, we acknowledge, we validate and respond, and we can really influence people. But the first step in influence is listening.
Yeah, 100%. And I think people know this, but it was helpful for me to hear this because we're talking about getting feedback, but also in giving feedback. It can be challenging. And one thing that I remember hearing early on was the feedback sandwich. You know what I mean? Like if you want to give somebody feedback and you're looking at what they were doing, you're going, gosh, they sure could have done that differently. Nobody's going to take feedback very well if you just go up to them and point out something that they did negative or something that they did wrong. So the feedback sandwich is start with something good, then give the feedback that they could work on and end with something good, right? I watched a soccer game a week or so ago where the team got just completely crushed 12-0. There was nothing good from that match other than I saw one of the kids who was trying his best and he was pointing out to all the other kids like, yo, you go over here, you go over there. He was being the leader. And that was the one thing that I saw. And I went up to them at the end and I said, hey, did you realize how good you were doing at being a leader? Do you realize how amazing you were at delegating and telling people where to go in that hard time, in that heart of a match? And he went, huh? Like they didn't see that. So we turned this negative, just destroyed soccer game into a, you know what? Yeah, there was something good from that.
Yeah.
So that feedback sandwich, give them the good, hit them with what maybe we can work on or the feedback and end with something good. They're going to walk away feeling like you've heard them and you really care about them.
Yeah. It's good. Well, so if you want that book again, it's called I Hear You. And I hope that this episode brought you value and was a good reminder to both be that courageous friend, leader, partner in someone's life and be willing to offer feedback, but do it with love. And if you're on the receiving end, take a beat. It's sometimes hard to receive, but it'll make you better. It'll make you a better person, a better partner, a better friend, a better leader if you can actually learn to receive feedback as well. And so I think that the most impactful leaders in my life also do that well. They receive feedback really well. And I really value the people that model that in our world. And anyways, we hope this was a good episode for all of you. And Ryan, do you want to close us up and tell everyone where they can find us?
Absolutely. As always, in regards to feedback, we love your feedback. So shoot us a message on all social media platforms. You can find us on the 15-Point Plan Facebook group. You can find Jacqueline and myself on Instagram at Ryan Park Greigg and Jacqueline Ray Smith. That's RAE Smith. And don't forget to check all of our other podcasts, the winmategive.com network. Share this podcast with somebody who you've given feedback to or gotten feedback from, or maybe they could just use a little talk on influence. Until next time, we thank you for listening. winmategive.com is where you find all the other podcasts. Bye, everyone.
Bye.